Welcome, everyone. I am Jessica Neuwirth, the director of the Human Rights Program here at Roosevelt House. Unfortunately, we're not any of us here at Roosevelt House, which is sad. I hope everyone is doing well and managing as best they can in this pandemic. But I want to welcome you to this Meet the Professors and really introduction to the Human Rights Program, which we really want to encourage you to think about in your hunter career. I think this is a time, if ever there was one, to be thinking about human rights in so many different ways. We're looking at, in many ways, a regression around the world, including in this country. And it's, for those of us who have been in the human rights movement, like I have for 20 or 30 years, it's very, very frightening, because you always feel like you're moving forward, or at least you want to be moving forward, and you think you're moving forward. And I think everything from torture to democracy to right to health, housing, employment, all these rights that are in our fundamental document, which is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was a document that came out of a process chaired by Eleanor Roosevelt in the 1940s. We're far from living up to those rights. And I do think this is a time for everybody to know more about what those rights are and how we can all do whatever we can in our own lives to get them. One of my favorite quotes from Eleanor Roosevelt is that human rights starts at home, in small places close to where we live, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our families. And I think that human rights, at least the way I see it and feel it, it's a movement. It's not an industry. It's not something you have to have a career in. There are more and more careers in human rights, which has been building our movement and making it stronger. And some of you may be interested in having a human rights career, in which case I would very strongly encourage you to join the Human Rights Program. But even if that's not your primary focus and you're a biology major or whatever, there's a place for you in the human rights movement. The human rights movement needs you, and you will benefit from a world that has more human rights in it. So I'm really glad to see all of you here today. We're going to introduce you to some of the professors who will be teaching in the spring. And we're going to talk a little bit about the program and leave plenty of time for any questions that you may have. And I also want to just introduce and welcome Harold Hosler, who's the director of Roosevelt House. I don't know if you want to say a few words, Harold? No, okay. So our quarterback in the program is Joanne Velardita, who many of you may know. She's the Human Rights Program Manager, and I'm just going to ask her to come on and just explain to you the mechanics of our program, what the requirements are, and then we'll come back to the courses that we're going to offer. Joanne?
Okay, well, hello and welcome to everybody. I'm going to go over some of the basic structure of the program. And in covering the basics, I think I will be answering many, or at least several of the questions that were submitted with the RSVPs. So the Human Rights Program offers two tracks, the minor and the certificate. And the minor is 15 credits. The certificate is 24 credits. They each have a set of core requirements. For the minor, we start with HR 200, and that's a requirement for being eligible to enroll in the program. And then there's HR 250, the Human Rights Internship, which is a very important, a key requirement for both tracks. Both HR 200 and 250 are requirements for both. With the minor, you're asked to do 3 electives, one of which may be, you may double count your a course in your major toward the minor if it is on an approved list of approved cognate courses. Then for the certificate, it's a 24 credit certificate, and it requires the HR 200 intro and the internship, and it carries 2 additional core requirements, HR 260 the Human Rights Internship Seminar, which is taught by our director, Jessica North. And I'm sure she can answer any questions about that. And then it culminates in the HR 350 capstone, which is a guided research paper. And fortunately for us, we have Mark Schulman with us here today. He's taught that for several years, and he can answer questions about that. So those are the basics for the minor and certificate tracks. I won't go on too much longer, but just to say that, you know, there's a lot of flexibility in how you fulfill the elective requirements. So each semester, the program invites professionals in the field to teach courses. We have 2 of them here with us today, 3 of them actually. And we offer courses that are developed in the program with an HR prefix. So that's a choice for the electives. And then we have a list, a very extensive list of over 100 courses that we approve as cognate courses that are taught in Hunter's regular academic programs that you may use to fulfill that requirement. For the certificate, we ask for 4 electives, but we do let you double count 2. So 2 in your major could count toward the fulfillment of those requirements. I'll stop there. You know, if there are any more questions, and particularly about the internships, we can answer those in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Joanne. So the gateway for our program, as Joanne said, is HR 200, Introduction to Human Rights. And so if you are sure that you want to be in this program, either as a minor or certificate student, you need to take HR 200 before you can even enroll in the course, in the program. And if you're not sure, it's a great way to find out whether it's something you might be interested in, is to take HR 200. And even if you know you don't want to be in the program formally, I think HR 200 is just a wonderful addition to your course load as an introduction to human rights. We've recently added a section because we have such growing interest. So we now have 5 sections, one every single day, of HR 200, and 3 of them are taught by Stephanie Ferrier and have been for the last 2 years. So we're very glad to have Stephanie Ferrier with us, and I'm hoping you want to maybe just say a few words about that course and your background in human rights.
Okay, sure, thanks. Hi, everybody. So what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about how I approach the course. As Jessica North mentioned, there are 3 different people teaching it. I teach 3 sections, and I'm going to just share my screen here to talk a little bit about sort of some of what we do, what we cover in the course as I teach it. So of course, you know, any course introducing people to human rights, you're going to start out asking, well, what are human rights? Let's make something a human right, as opposed to maybe a nice thing to have, a privilege, etc. And so one of the exercises we do in my class is, after an initial discussion, we then, when we look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, this foundational document the UN produced, right? We do so through the organizing materials for the 1963 March on Washington. And we look at what was it that they, in their organizing materials, say what we demand and what we're asking. And so this is kind of a way into looking at the text of this document, the Universal Declaration, to really get a handle on what kinds of things does it cover. And so much of what they were asking for is actually reflected in the Universal Declaration. And then we look at some of the people who were involved in drafting the Declaration. Eleanor Roosevelt, the best known, but students also learn about Hansa Mehta from India, and Minerva Bernardino from the Dominican Republic, key figures in some pretty important clauses in the Declaration. We look at issues, sometimes people might call them difficult issues, cultural relativism, universalism. And so we watch an interview of the famous Nigerian Nobel laureate Wole Soyinka, together with a UN expert, Karima Banoun, talking about cultural relativism and universalism. And we look at various institutions, human rights institutions, both the United Nations and the regional institutions for protecting rights. And always, the way I approach it anyway, is to incorporate the lives of activists who've been working on human rights, whether they called it human rights or not. So we've looked at Dolores Huerta, the United Farm Workers co-founder. We've looked at Fannie Lou Hamer, who is an inspiration par excellence, and also Diane Nash. And we also look at various issues in human rights. So one of them, we do a case study of the right to protest, the right to protest. So this year, because as we speak, major protests going on in Thailand, we learn not only about the measures governments are taking to try and suppress the protests, and we look at it through a human rights lens, but we also learn more about some of the people involved. And here we have a photo of one of the, as it's described, the face of Thailand's youth protest movement, who unfortunately is right now in jail for peacefully protesting. Other issues include human rights and the environment. And we learn about the work, for example, of Jimmy Luguyon from the Philippines and Chutwati from Cambodia, both of whom unfortunately paid with their lives to try and protect environmental rights. Other issues include gender and human rights. And just one piece of what we look at, here we have Bayard Rustin, the person who actually organized the 1963 March on Washington, and learn about him and his life, amongst other things. So this is a quick breeze through what really takes a whole semester. And I've also been asked to squeeze into my time a little bit of information about myself. I'm going to do it really quickly. So I was actually, I was born in Thailand, in Bangkok. My dad was in the diplomatic service because he wanted to foment peace. And so that's part of where I grew up. Then moved to Hong Kong. And this is what Hong Kong looked like when I lived there. Now the hillside is completely covered with buildings. Then we moved to Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, and where I started my schooling. And I still remember my wonderful teacher, Mrs. Dias, and that's me in the very front row there. And then we went to Japan, and I lived in Tokyo for 5 years, and went to a wonderful little school. Who's really is intent on raising citizens of the world. That's their stated goal. It's multicultural, multilingual education. So this is me in my 4th grade class. So that's me near the top of the stairs. And I've stayed in touch with my classmates. Some years later, I was back in Tokyo to give a talk at a conference. This is Higashi, or Shikei Nishigashi, which is Death Penalty West and East. It's about the death penalty, and got together with my former classmates you just saw in 4th grade. All right, now international work. Obviously, I come up to things international by birth. So I've done quite a lot of advocacy at the United Nations. This photo was with Kofi Annan when he was Secretary General of the UN. In the middle is Pierre Sané when he was Secretary General of Amnesty International. At the time, I was the head of the legal office, Legal and International Organizations Office at Amnesty International, based in London. I've done things like, help with workshops on how to submit a complaint to the UN committee that deals with discrimination against women. This is a different workshop. The special rapporteur, the UN expert on violence against women, called this workshop together in Bangkok, Thailand, to meet with activists in the Asia Pacific region. And so she asked me to help lead part of that workshop. I've worked with many different NGOs, in addition to Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch. Here are just some of them. You can see a range of issues here: economic and social rights, environmental rights, sexuality and human rights, child soldiers, and then with many of the UN human rights experts on a range of different issues. And literally everyone on this list in the middle here is somebody I used to work with, because we're a group that, well, I guess we should be larger. And here are some additional NGOs around the world. I also worked on the Pinochet case, which I won't go into now, but I have to say that was a pretty heady, exciting experience. And then I've done field work. This has all been for Amnesty. So I did a visit to Yemen, which was just, I'm so lucky I got there when I did. Unfortunately, it's, you know, what's happening now with the fighting is a real tragedy. And met, you know, through this work, you meet the most wonderful, amazing people. Here's the founder of the Women's Studies Department at the University of Sana'a in Yemen. And then we met with a group of lawyers, and I share this photo with their permission. These lawyers who were working on cases we were following. The publisher of a newspaper, brother was being harassed. Met with judges and lawyers, and the Human Rights Committee of Parliament. I actually talk about this meeting in my class, one of my classes. It's kind of interesting. And then off to India, my colleague on the right, a researcher for Amnesty International, meeting with an activist there on the left, getting information. And she introduced us to people in a village who there was an incident that they wanted us to look into. And then here's the police station that we went to afterwards, the police station where we asked the police chief about a number of things. And then Malawi, where we went to talk about the death penalty, met with the president and various other officials, the traditional chiefs and NGOs. And again, incredibly, incredibly inspiring human rights activist, Vera Cherwa. And in other work, I was also in Pakistan and met with Asma Jahangir and Hina Jalani, additional inspirations. And so some of this and some of these people, I love to share the people that I meet with my classes, is what I do in the class. So that's just a little bit about me and some of the work I've done.
Thank you so much, to Stephanie Ferrier. That is a class I wish I could have taken when I was in college. And we didn't have human rights classes when I was in college. So that's something that's changed a lot. And I should mention that in addition to the formal requirements and course offerings, we've tried to grow the program to give students experiential learning, but in addition to their internship opportunities. So we couldn't do it this year because of the coronavirus, but last year and the year before, we organized trips to Nepal that were supported by Hunter, and took a group of students in the program to go, you know, like Stephanie Ferrier did, and meet themselves with some of these amazing activists and really see how does human rights work in practice, and how doesn't it work, which is often the case. So those are opportunities that we hope to continue offering as soon as we get through this difficult time. So again, thanks for that. That's intro course to Human Rights HR 200. And next, just to give you a sense of some of the electives that we offer, which rotate regularly, we're really excited about this one that EGMDK is offering for the first time on Black racism and the UN. Very timely, urgent issue, and probably something many of us don't know that much about how or whether the UN is addressing. So let me just, excuse me, introduce EGMDK to talk a little bit about that course.
All right, thank you, Jessica. And thank you for having me. I'm excited to be teaching this class. Let me start by saying that Stephanie has put me completely to shame because I have no PowerPoint to share. But we'll try to go over some of the points, my background, how I got to this work, and then what the course will be in 10 minutes. So I have over 20 years of experience doing human rights work. Don't let the youthfulness fool you. But I started working in human rights really, as Jessica said, close to home in New York City. I started doing human rights work when Giuliani was mayor of the city. And the work that I was doing really came after his administration had instituted different ways in which people who were on what were called food stamps then were being discouraged from getting their food stamps and stigmatized and made to feel bad. and just recognizing that we live in one of the wealthiest countries in the world and that nobody should be going hungry. So I was inspired to do work in human rights because the organization I joined had just published a book or report called Hunger is No Accident. And it really detailed ways in which our policies were creating a situation so that people were hungry when we could have different priorities and nobody would be going hungry. I was very intrigued by that idea and really worked since then to try to get international human rights standards that were in international human rights treaties, including CEDAW, as Stephanie just mentioned, incorporated into local law. Largely unsuccessful, but in terms of getting actual laws codified at the local level. But what we were really successful in doing was educating not just elected officials in New York City, but also the social justice community that would really be a human rights community in any other country, about human rights standards and human rights laws that were applicable and that we could be using to try to advance justice at the local level. And part of that work was publishing one of the first comprehensive reports on race disparities in New York City on a range of issues: education, child welfare, policing. And then and that was 2007, this report I'm referencing was a report that we then submitted to the United Nations, to the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which is one of the mechanisms that we will be talking about in detail in the class that I'll be teaching. But then, as in now, we found that in almost any area, we have disparities, and you find that people of color, and in particular, Black people or people of African descent, be they Black or Latinx, and then of course, other people of color in the United States are always finding themselves the least likely to enjoy their full range of human rights. So that got me really interested early in looking at systemic racism and designs and how that is connected with human rights. So a lot of my understanding and learning about human rights has actually come through practice. It's come through trying to understand what the human rights standards are so that we could use them and try to incorporate them into local law. It's come from really organizing people at the grassroots level, people who are directly impacted by issues, to write reports that they then submit to the United Nations, and to use these international human rights mechanisms, many of the special mandates, as Stephanie mentioned as well, to try to get justice for communities who have been directly impacted. And I think one of the things that I'm most proud about is that in the work that I've done is really changing the face of who is seen as an expert at the United Nations or within international and regional human rights spaces. So we went from, instead of it just being some of the big organizations like the Amnesties or the Human Rights Watches, or in the US, the ACLUs, to having a much broader range of people who are now representing civil society in the United States, and it primarily being people who are directly impacted by human rights violations themselves and fighting for human rights accountability in their communities. So I'm talking about people who've been formerly homeless, talking about victims of gender-based violence or survivors of gender-based violence, talking about families who've lost loved ones to state violence, to police violence. And so we were at the United Nations with the mother of Trayvon Martin and the father of Jordan Davis, both children who had lost their lives to what I call state-enabled violence, is gun violence in their case, where there was little to no accountability offered by the government. I was in Geneva with them when Michael Brown was shot in the United States in 2014. And so we came back to fight that. And I think one of the things that I focus on in my class is fighting US exceptionalism. This not as prevalent belief, but it used to be quite prevalent that somehow human rights abuses were not necessarily happening in the United States, or that if they were, we had stronger mechanisms to address them. What we found in really delving into the history of the modern human rights regime is that it's very difficult or it's inextricable, I should say, from the history of racial oppression in this country and abroad. So in fact, a lot of human rights laws were drafted in such a way to exempt countries like the United States, like the United Kingdom, countries that had either colonized countries in the global South, or that were benefiting from the colonization or the transatlantic slave trade and Jim Crow, to exempt them from accountability for human rights, while at the same time being promoters of human rights. So we talk about a lot of the origins of human rights law and how that is connected with anti-Black racism. And then we go on to talk about how communities that are fighting for Black liberation in the United States primarily, but also around the world, have insisted on claiming the promise of human rights law, have insisted on claiming or using international human rights treaties and special mandates, all the mechanisms to try to advance justice in their communities. Let me end by saying that, as Jessica mentioned, this year, more than any, I should say, in my adult life, has really demonstrated the need for this kind of a course, looking at how we fight anti-Black racism using all the tools as a human rights issue and using all the tools that are available to us. We've seen the exposure of the prevalence of white supremacy in the United States this year, over the past few years. We saw the disparities and how they hit people of color and communities of color disproportionately from the COVID-19 pandemic. And then again, we were reminded of police violence, state violence, and the lack of accountability for it with the racial uprising. So I think there's never been a better time in my mind to claim and use human rights to fight anti-Black racism as there is today. So I'm looking forward to having and talking to you all about that. And I time myself.
Perfect timing. Thank you so much, Ejim. So that sounds like a really important and timely course. And I was just thinking, as I'm introducing our next speaker, that probably all of you students at Hunter were born at a time when we were somewhere at war in the world, and that all of your lifetime we've been at war somewhere, because war has been such a constant, which was not always the case. But we're very, very excited to have this new course from Mark Schulman, who has taught many different courses, as well as the capstone, which is our thesis course for students in the certificate program. And this coming semester, Mark Schulman is teaching the laws of war. So let me introduce him and ask him to just say a few words about his own background in that course. Mark Schulman.
Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate the opportunity to introduce myself and this course, The Laws of War, Humanitarian Law and War Crimes Tribunals. And happily, to introduce myself is to introduce this course. To introduce this course is to introduce myself. As Jessica said, it's deep in the American experience to be at war. When I was a kid, this was a long time ago, the United States was at war in Southeast Asia, Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos. And as a kid, I was taken by my parents to various anti-war protests in Washington and the community where we lived. And I had long hair and a little hand-carved peace sign and a poster, but I was a little kid. So I knew what I believed to be right and wrong, that the war in Southeast Asia was wrong, that the United States should not be trying to impose some foreign notions of government on people far, far away about whom we knew so little. But I didn't know why, and I wanted to figure out what was going so terribly wrong in Vietnam. Well, I went to school and I didn't learn much about it. And I went to college. I actually went to the same college Jessica did at about the same time. And as she told you, we didn't have a HR 200 course. There weren't introduction to human rights courses in colleges back then, not that I know of. So instead, I approached the study of this puzzle the way that many people at that college did, was to study the rise and fall of great powers, of great empires. When I was a small child, the great European empires were devolving. The British Empire, the French Empire, less famously, the Spanish, Dutch, and Portuguese empires were devolving. And that led to some of the colonial wars within the Cold War framework that were so ugly and so bitterly contested, which had the so-called democracies on what I've got to say were typically the wrong side. And that these wars led to horrifying atrocities. So I studied the rise and fall of great powers. The great power I was most interested in is the United States. And the puzzle has always been how the United States came to do such awful things in Vietnam while I was a kid, in a country where I was told we were exceptional, that we didn't need external enforcement of human rights norms because we'd basically invented it. We had Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt as our stars in our human rights pantheon. We had Dr. King, although only for a few months while I was alive. A few years while I was alive. But that puzzle of studying the great powers led me to do a PhD in history, where I studied the military origins of the rise of the United States as a global power, where I could examine the role of the US in its burgeoning empire in the Caribbean, its burgeoning informal empire in the Caribbean and in the Western Pacific. I got my first teaching job, teaching history at that same college, and was told I was going to teach a course on the laws of war, happily with my mentors. It was co-taught. And we produced a book that is now nearly 30 years old, called The Laws of War, which was a historical survey of the constraints that have been voluntarily assumed by states over the millennia. The constraints on the conduct of war, the do's and don'ts, what you would call war, the prohibitions on war crimes, crimes against humanity, basically atrocities. And so my very first professional teaching experience is the laws of war. Now, back then in 1990, the laws of war was a subject really only for historians. There hadn't been a war crimes tribunal since Nuremberg wrapped up in 1949. That's a half century of impunity. And while there hadn't been great global wars, there had been a lot of those colonial wars I was telling you about, and a lot of atrocities. Finally, in the early 1990s, after we taught this course called The Laws of War and produced the book called The Laws of War, which is the first compilation of the history of the laws of war. Only after that did lawyers start to get involved in the enforcement of these norms with the establishment of tribunals, international criminal tribunals for the former Yugoslavia, and then for Rwanda following its April 1994 genocide. And so now I've been teaching the laws of war as a historian, and along comes this development that it's now subject of litigation. And indeed, Jessica has litigated there at the Tribunal for Rwanda to very impressive effect. So I realized, okay, I can teach history, I can teach this subject, but I should probably go to law school. So after teaching full-time and working in think tanks for about 6 years, I went to law school, studied the laws of war with Telford Taylor, who had been the chief prosecutor at the national tribunals, the second round, the subsequent trials at Nuremberg, and then continued to teach the laws of war. Regrettably, Professor Taylor, General Taylor, passed away shortly after I took his course, and so the law school asked me to teach the same course. So I taught that while I was practicing law, and following 9/11, I decided I have to go back to academia full-time, which is pretty much where I've been for the last 19 years, as a dean, as a program builder, and principally as a teacher, teaching human rights related courses, laws of war. Most recently, I've been teaching international law and human rights at Fordham Law School and at Sarah Lawrence College for about 10 years now, 11 years, and teaching a variety of courses here at the Hunter Human Rights Program. HR 200, I've probably taught 8 or 10 times. The capstone, I think 3 times. And most recently, Human Rights in China, Rise and Fall of the Great Powers. Remember that theme? So I've been very interested in the rise of China for a couple of decades. I go there often. I teach there every summer, except of course the summer of COVID. And these past couple of years have been really blessed to teach human rights in China with Teng Biao, one of China's most famous human rights advocates and now refugees, who's a Grove Scholar at Hunter. I'm eternally grateful to Jessica for pairing me up with Teng Biao for that amazing opportunity. And now, having come full circle, I'm back to teaching the laws of war. So this course will be a study of the history, the development of these norms, the do's and don'ts in warfare. And along the way, if you take the class, you'll learn a lot about how and why wars are conducted. And you'll learn about the norms and the hard law that regulates the conduct of war. We will also study some of the ways that war is limited in by what's called jus ad bellum or just war theory, the rules and moral precepts that constrain states or others from going to war. So war is bounded. War is awful, right? It's hideous. It is to be avoided, and that's very much the norm embodied in Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. So war is bounded by many different laws. The law of going to war, jus ad bellum, just war theory. It's also bounded by what you can use as an instrument of war, no unnecessarily destructive weapons. It's bounded by whom you can use these instruments against, not prisoners of war who have put down their arms and put up their hands, or doctors or nurses wearing red crosses, not churches, not schools full of children, and several other slightly more esoteric principles about proportionality and discrimination. So we're going to study how those concepts, those boundaries evolve from ancient Greece and Middle Ages through early modern Europe, through the American Civil War, the 2 world wars, which were transformative, into those wars of national liberation, and finally into those more recent wars. I'm smiling only because they've occurred since I started teaching the subject, only since my academic interest became subject of litigation in the tribunals. And we will end up with a conversation about emerging challenges to these norms, the challenges that arise through non-state terrorism, through cyber operations, and through various non-military efforts to inflict pain on other countries through economic sanctions. So we're going to study all that, write a couple of papers where you get to develop your own interests and learn a lot about the doctrine of laws of war, some of the skills of researching it, analyzing it, advising on it, and a lot about those values that have been developed over millennia to constrain it. There we go.
Thank you so much, Mark. Before we continue, I'd love to take that course as well. I know that EdGymDK has a constraint with time. So are there any burning questions? She has a couple of minutes about her course on anti-Black racism and the UN. Let me just see before she has to go, if anyone has any questions. I don't know if there's a Q&A function here, maybe not. Just either come online and ask your question or put it in the chat. And if you don't want to do that, you can always get in touch with us later and we can
Yeah,
to
I
answer
can
them.
also share my email address.
Oh, that'd be great. Do you want to put it in the chat maybe?
Yeah, except I have to remember what my Hunter. I think it's EDIKE.
Not sure.
Is that it?
Does anyone know, Joanne? You know, we'll put it in the chat. We can put it in the chat for anyone who's interested.
It's EDIKE at Hunter. I think it's edu.
Oh, hunter.cuny.edu.
That CUNY, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so much for that. And thank you, Mark, for an introduction to that course, which does sound like a course I wish I could have taken also in college. I want to just mention the other courses briefly that we're offering in the spring, just in case they catch your interest. One is Equality and Human Rights, which is being taught by Antoine Johnson, a civil rights lawyer, who has not taught at Hunter before. This is his first course, and we're excited about it. It's basically going to focus on social inequality and intersectionality. And the other course is a philosophy and political science course that's cross-listed as a human rights course called Internationalism in an Age of Nationalism, which is being taught by Carol Gould, who's a Hunter faculty member from the philosophy department and actually the chair of our curriculum committee in the human rights program. And her course is going to look at human rights as a framework for international obligations. So check out those courses as well. And as Joanne Velardita mentioned, there are many other courses for which you can get credit in the human rights program. And just a word about internships. I supervise the internship program, and for anyone who's taken HR 200 and is in the program, that is a requirement. We have a list of internships. We have a lot of history with a lot of organizations that have offered students internships, but often students come and find their own new internships. We're very open to any aspect of human rights that you want to focus on. And you have the primary responsibility to find the internship, but we're here to help you. We have lots of lists and lots of people that we know to help place you, even in this time, which has not been easy to do internships. So let us know if you need help with an internship, if you're already in the program. And the way the internship program works is it's 120 hours to 3-credit course, 120 hours of internship work with the organization. You write a journal once a week, submit 4 journals once a month and timesheets. And at the end, you write a reflection paper with your sort of summary of your experience in that internship. And we really feel strongly that anyone who wants to do human rights should get that practical experience to see what is it really like in practice? And there are many ways to do that. Most of them are nonprofit organizations, but sometimes people have done government agencies, UN, even missions to the UN. So there's really a lot of different ways to do that internship. And then the other two requirements, which were mentioned, one is the course that I teach on. It's the internship seminar, human rights internship seminar, and you have to have already done your internship or be taking the course concurrent with your internship. And the goal of that course, the way I construct it, is to help give you a context for your internship so that you see the human rights movement in all of its kind of diversity and richness as a movement. And we look at lots of different ways of doing advocacy, different organizations, the roles that they play, the evolution of the human rights movement. And it's a lot of exposure to different organizations. We have in the past generally done site visits. Obviously now we're doing it all online site visits, but we really try to give you a kind of snapshot of different pieces of the movement, how they fit together, and some discussion about that to help you understand your internship. And for those of you who want to have a career in human rights, to start to think about what that might look like. So that's the internship requirement, and then the course that goes with it. Then we have the capstone, which Mark Schulman has taught for the last 3 years. This year it will be taught by John Wallach, a faculty member in the history department. No, sorry, political science department at Hunter. Just this year, but none of you, I guess, will be taking that this year. So, so hopefully in the future we'll be having that course with Mark Schulman, and it's a thesis that you write on a subject of interest to you, and that completes the requirements. So I think I should probably stop there. To say that and introduce Katrina Avila, who is hopefully here with us. Yes. Who organized this event and organizes all of our events, and is herself a recent graduate of Hunter and the Human Rights Program. So she's a great source of information from a recent former student perspective about it. And she's now helping us organize events and also edits a newsletter which comes out every 2 weeks called Your Day. And that would be something I would encourage you to take a look at. Again, even if you're not in the Human Rights Program, just read it. It's news about human rights. We have a column written sometimes by students, faculty. We advertise internships. We advertise jobs, fellowships, events coming up, whatever might be of interest in the area of human rights. So that newsletter is something you can easily sign up for. And I think she just put in the chat box a link to it. So I think I will stop there and see if anyone has any questions that you would like to raise. We don't seem to have a Q&A, so I guess chat, let me see what's in here. Who should we email about internship programs? That would be Joanne. Any practical questions, or if you're interested in joining the program, write to Joanne Velardita, and her email is in the chat. And anything else? Shifa, are you saying? Yeah, go ahead.
But I'm not sure if it would be best to email Joanne about it or speak to you.
No, go ahead.
I have, sorry, just give me a second. I have a couple of questions, but I'll start with the most relevant and go from there. I just wanted to ask if it's too late for me to join the Human Rights Program, as I only have 1 semester left at Hunter, and I've only taken 2 HR classes.
If you only have 1 semester, then I guess the only way you could do it would be as a minor. I do recognize you as the President of the United States because I think I saw you in that role. Is that right? In the
Yes, I was in that role. I
class,
was
so I know you. Yeah, so that was a fantastic performance. We had maybe you want to talk about it a little bit. It was a really fun class, I thought, given by Catherine Tinker about climate change. So climate change, and it was like a mock mock exercise in which Shifa played the president of the United States and did just a masterful job. I wish you were president of the United States right now. So, so I think the answer to your question, and Joanne can jump in, but I think if you have enough credits and you can do the internship next semester, that and whatever other credits you need, that would be worth looking into. And there may be some courses that you've taken that are already approved that you can count towards the thing, but maybe be in touch with Joanne. What do you think, Joanne?
Well, I think it could be a challenge, but it depends upon what courses you've already taken. Have you taken HR 200?
No, I've only taken the Economics of Human Rights with Professor Phelim Klein and my current class with Professor Tinker. And Professor Tinker was the person who advised me to look into this as a minor if I could.
So you'd have to take HR
Yeah.
200 and the internship.
Yeah.
I don't know if that,
And the intern.
and then you might even need one more course, I guess.
Yeah.
Or maybe not. I
I
don't know.
think, you know, if you would write to me, Shifa, and we can have a meeting about it, and I can take a look at your course history, and we can go over it and see if it's something that could be done.
Oh, I've also taken Asian American Civil Rights and the Law, as Katerina reminded me. And so I suppose I've taken 3 HR classes, but yes, I will definitely write to you.
I mean,
And
you could make it probably if you've taken 3 already and you take HR 200 and an internship. I think that could work, but
Yeah.
I'm going to leave it to Joanne.
Yeah.
She's our resident expert.
Yeah.
So hopefully that'll work.
Yeah, I think best for us to touch base directly about it and see how we can plot it out.
thank you so much. I'll follow up with an email after this then.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Recruits?
There's one question in the chat by Emmanuel.
Where can we find a list of courses that can be part of the minor certificate? Is that online, Joanne? We can send you the list, but that must be online somewhere.
Yes, it is online.
Where
Our
would you
full cognate list and our current courses are online.
so where would they find it online?
Well, if they go to the Human Rights
Okay.
Program,
Okay, Katrina,
There it
thank you.
is.
Katrina just put it
Yeah.
on there. Our high tech resident expert. So
Yeah.
that's where you will find the accredited courses, and it's quite a long
Mhm.
list. So you may have even taken some that you didn't realize were accredited. Any other questions online or in person? Feel free to jump in. And I also would say, Jada, is that? No, okay. Yes, no.
I do have a question. I do have a question. I caught Professor Schulman's objectives, but I'm not sure if I didn't hear the others. I know one of the professors left. In addition to that question, I understand that it's a human rights course. All of them are human rights courses, so everyone should be somewhat interested and knowledgeable in taking these courses. But for each course, is there somewhat of an ideal person, or how does the course best align with someone's interests? Like what interests would they best suit for each course if possible?
I think human rights, we've had people from all different majors, science, mostly humanities, but I think that human rights is one of those cross-cutting issues that affects everyone in their own personal lives. And it can also be related to your study, whatever your study is, and your career, whatever it is. So I think, the only real kind of profile that we would have for people who take a human rights course is someone who wants to see social justice or some progress towards the realization of human rights. And so it's a really interdisciplinary subject, and it's really, I think, better to have more people from different backgrounds to come together to talk about and promote human rights. So we're very, very interested. And what I was going to say is we're very open to your ideas. Every semester we're coming up with new courses. So if you have a subject that you're super interested in, like like disability rights or something that we haven't taught, you can certainly suggest that to us. And we, if we feel there would be interest in that course, are very happy to put those courses together. You know, we want to really keep it current and make sure that we tackle all of the current and cutting edge issues in the movement. So we're very open to that. And there are a lot of ways in which you can work with us to get events organized. We've had a lot of student participation from people in our program, and it's a small program. So it's really, I think, easy to get integrated and play a very active role. So let's see, I don't want to put anyone on the spot and assume that because you just put your camera on, you have a question. But Julian, did you have a question? No. Shifa, no other question. Okay. Anyone else? So let me just put one person on the spot, and that's Katrina, and ask you to just say a few words about having recently graduated from the program. If there's anything you feel that we haven't said that you think would be helpful to students who are thinking about it, and maybe a little bit about why you came into the program, because I think you were one of those unusual majors, right?
Yeah, so I wasn't expecting to speak, but I did just graduate in June, and I started working for the Human Rights Program since August. And I was actually a human biology major, and I decided to take Intro to Human Rights because I know that it fulfilled, I think, a gen ed requirement, but also I was intrigued by it because I had recently come back from the Philippines, where I volunteered with girls who were either trafficked or neglected or abused. And that was something that I thought, okay, I can't just have that experience and not try to do something about it once I come back to the States. And obviously being a college student, you know, you have the opportunity to explore interests and be able to really like reflect in a more critical academic way about them. So Intro to Human Rights was the perfect course. And so I took that, and I sort of first decided, okay, I'll do the minor. But then after I did the minor, I finished my internship, and I did that at a local nonprofit on Long Island. It's called New Hour for Women and Children. And I worked with women who were either recently just came out of prison and jail or were currently incarcerated. And after that experience, I was like, oh, wait, maybe I should do the certificate, because I wanted to just delve even deeper into the Human Rights Program. And that led me to where I am today. But that just goes to show that it doesn't really matter what type of student you are, whether you're political science, which many students are, or history, but you can be any type of student, and human rights will be applicable to what you study. I know for me, for example, there's so many different intersections between human rights, public health, biology, psychology, which are, you know, types of courses that I've taken through my major. So yeah, if you have any questions, I'll drop my email in the chat, and I'd be happy to speak with any of you guys. Yeah.
Jessica.
Yes.
Hi, Jessica. I just wanted to add about the compatibility of human rights with a wide range of majors. Just to say that we've even had 2 accounting majors who minored in human rights. So, and they found it very enjoyable and very beneficial. So we've had a very wide range of various majors in our program.
The human rights movement needs everybody. It needs people with all different kinds of skills, background, and experience. I joined the human rights movement as a high school student and grew up in a very volunteer part of the movement, working with Amnesty International. So I just think it enriches your life no matter how big or small your time commitment is. It's just something everybody should be in touch with. And certainly, and I'm not just saying this because we're at Roosevelt House, but everyone should read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and learn a little bit about Eleanor Roosevelt, who I think was really a visionary when it comes to human rights. And so we're very proud to be at Hunter and be at Roosevelt House, and it's a wonderful place. If we ever get back there, we would love to meet you in person. Normally, as I said at the beginning, that's where we would be, and you can feel the spirit of the Universal Declaration right in that home where she lived. So Are there any more questions? Last call for questions, comments? Let me do a quick advertisement. Mark Schulman mentioned Tang Biao, who is an incredible person that we're lucky to have in our universe here at Roosevelt House. And he's taught now for the second time, he's teaching human rights in China. He himself was a dissident. And recently he was involved in a effort to commemorate the Tiananmen Square massacre, which happened, what was the anniversary, Mark? Was it the 20th anniversary? 10th, 20, must be 20th, seems.
June 4th, 1989.
1989. So that last year, I guess it was then. They were celebrating the anniversary. I thought it was this year. Maybe it was just the annual event in June. And it was a Zoom event like everything else because of COVID. And Zoom was asked by the Chinese government to stop this event plus several other events that were scheduled to commemorate that massacre. And Zoom somewhat complied with that request. And one of the key organizers of one of the demonstrations, one of the commemorations, who had been himself at Tiananmen Square, actually had a Zoom account suspended at the request of the Chinese government, which is pretty outrageous. So we actually are going to be organizing an event, we have organized an event, which is taking place tomorrow night at 8 p.m. And Tang Biao will be part of the panel, and a New York Times correspondent who wrote about it, and a professor who's an expert in corporate and social media and corporate intersection. And the event is at 8 p.m. and I'm going to ask Katrina to tell people, or maybe put it in the chat, virtual meeting platforms, government control and corporate compliance. It's a kind of new area of human rights, right? How these huge platforms like Zoom that have so much power over our lives are being influenced by governments, and in some cases pressured, to limit the freedom of expression that we have and that we need in order to continue. So so that's tomorrow night at 8. And read the newsletter. Is there anything else coming up? I think no. So we hope we'll see you again soon, one way or another. We hope you'll join the program if you can and help us spread the word. And I hope everyone stays safe and healthy. And thank you to Mark Schulman and Ejim and all of our, Stephanie Ferrier, of course, and all of our team, Joanne Velardita and Katrina Avila and Hector. Hector Perez, who's not visible but online and really helped us with the technology of all of this. So enjoy the rest of your day and get back in touch with us if you have any questions. And thanks again for joining us. And sorry we couldn't offer you lunch. Take care. Bye, everyone.